The Israel-Hamas war has just hit the 6-month mark. It's been a half a year since that horrible day in October in 2023 when many scores of Palestinian Hamas terrorists and other gunmen broke through the gates and went on a killing spree and killed thousands or over 1,000 Israelis, some military, some civilians, before going back. And this just sparked the unleashing of a massive war that's been going on now for 6 months. When that war first started, the idea was expected because of the overwhelming disparity in power between the Israeli Defense Forces and the Hamas fighters that it probably wouldn't last that long. Definitely that has not been the case. As so often turns out to be the case, war does not follow a script, even though one side seems to be much more powerful than the other, especially in terms of when you don't have a conventional fight, but when you have something like an insurgency, which is what we have here. Very different rules than, say, the Russia-Ukraine war, which is two conventional armies. We have one of the show's favorites to try and untangle some of this, where we're at 6 months, where we're going to be going maybe in the next 6 months. Matthew Ho, good friend of mine, former Marine Corps combat leader, former State Department official, and current associate director of the Eisenhower Network. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Okay, thanks, Danny.
Now, I know you don't have very many opinions on this, so I'm going to probably have to pull it out of you. It's going to be really hard because I know you don't have any strong feelings on this, but I'm going to ask you just to kind of go with the flow here, if you don't mind.
All right.
All right, so let's just go. So we want to get an assessment of where this war has been for the first half year, and then make some projections on where we think it's going to go. So let's get our first analyst here, a figure of some renown that you may have heard about, Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's his assessment at 6 months.
We're marking 6 months of war today. The achievements of the war are great. We've eliminated 19 out of 24 Hamas battalions, including senior commanders. We've killed, wounded, or captured a significant number of Hamas terrorists. We've cleared Shifa, as well as many other terrorist headquarters. We've destroyed rocket manufacturing plants, war rooms, weapons, and ammunition caches. And we continue to systematically destroy the underground tunnels. We're a step away from victory.
A step away from victory. That
Right.
is good news that the war is just about over. Didn't realize that. But by the way, also in that same press conference, Netanyahu was asked about, hey, the U.S. seems to keep trying to say they want an immediate ceasefire and they want you to do some things differently. And he says, well, hang on, because if we do that, then maybe it won't be a step away from victory. And in fact, will be asking us to surrender. Here's how he put it.
חמאס מונע עסקה. דרישותיו הקיצוניות נועדו להביא להפסקת המלחמה והשארתו על כנו. זאת אומרת, להבטיח את הישרדותו, את שיקומו, את היכולת שלו לסכן את אזרחינו ואת חיילינו. כניעה לדרישות החמאס תאפשר לו לנסות לחזור על פשעי ה-7 באוקטובר שוב ושוב, כפי שהבטיח לעשות. חמאס מקווה שהלחץ מבחוץ ומבפנים יגרום לישראל להיכנע לדרישות קיצוניות אלה. זה לא יקרה. ישראל מוכנה לעסקה. ישראל לא מוכנה לכניעה. במקום שהלחץ הבינלאומי יופנה לישראל.
I think it's interesting, Matt, because it seems like Netanyahu is basically using Hamas as a tool to say, no, holding them up and go, no, I can't do it because look, they want to kill me. They want to, they want me to surrender and we can't do that. And that kind of harkens back into me how for years prior to all of this, Netanyahu basically kept Hamas on life support and asked Qatar to give them some money, apparently rerouted some back to them, sometimes openly, not like secretly behind the scenes, but wanted to keep them strong enough to stay in power so that no one would force him to make a two-state deal with them, but not so strong that they could do what they ended up doing. So he messed that up. But it seems like every time you turn around, Netanyahu's trying to use Hamas to prevent any kind of resolution that's going to have anything to do for the Palestinian people.
Right. Hamas for Netanyahu, Danny, is his lifeblood in many ways. Let's go back to that first clip you played where he's rattling off all the different battle damage estimates, right? We've destroyed this, we've destroyed that, we're doing this, victory is around the corner. It makes me think of, it's too bad Israel doesn't have an aircraft carrier for him to fly a plane and land on, like
Oh,
George W.
man.
Bush did, right, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, and declare victory.
Mission accomplished.
But even before just that recitation by Netanyahu of we've destroyed this, that, the other thing, it sounds so familiar to us, right? These battle damage estimates, the body count, if you will, and it certainly has meaning, and you have to understand what he's saying, and appreciate the significance of the destruction, as we're certainly seeing with the video coming from Khan Yunis today, where the reports are that Khan Yunis, who everyone thought, Gaza City in the north, have been completely destroyed, and now that people are getting into Khan Yunis, it's very possible that the destruction of Khan Yunis is even more severe than the destruction of Gaza City.
Yeah, Gary's showing some of that right there.
Yeah, 80%. The initial reports are 80% of the cities destroyed. So, I mean, certainly we can't really fully dismiss what Netanyahu's saying about how much the Israeli army has destroyed in Gaza, because it's clear, and it serves their strategic purpose of making Gaza uninhabitable in order to force Palestinian people to leave, right? But it doesn't do anything in terms of affecting the political situation. It certainly doesn't do anything in terms of positively affecting the circumstances of the resistance in Palestine towards occupation. What it does actually is strengthens the Palestinian resolve, the Palestinian steadfastness, the desire to be rid of the occupation. So these things that he was addressing in that first clip, yes, they may be true, but that certainly does not tell the whole story. And in fact, it's more than that. It leaves out so much about, well, have you actually defeated the spirit of the Palestinian people? And you have not, and you will not, because that's impossible to do. And this is what you and I have been talking about for 6 months now. The strategic folly of this, how this is actually going to make things worse for Israel. But in the near time, let's get to the second clip. In the near term, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival, it all depends upon that Palestinian resistance still being there, right? Because as soon as it's clear that Netanyahu no longer has the Hamas crutch to lean on, right? He can't wave the Hamas flag around and say, if you get rid of me, Hamas is going to come and they're going to kill us all. As soon as that narrative is not even dissolved, but just diminished, then Netanyahu's political survival is in real jeopardy. And
yeah,
so
now I got some clips to show here in a second from Marwan Bishara, always one of the most eloquent truth tellers out there about what's really going on. He's going to address that issue because I think that Netanyahu has a plan for once he's finished with that crutch, and he's going to be going for some other ones. But I'll get to that in just a second. First of all, though, I want to show here something that's still kind of an open sore and kind of painful to see, and that is Jose Andres talking to ABC News over the weekend about the horrible situation with the 7 aid workers who were killed, some of his close friends. So he's very emotional about in some areas. But I want to play a specific part of that to where he talks about that this is no longer just a war. It's no longer just about his 7 people that he lost. It's not even really so much about the Palestinian people. Something he says is much larger. Check this out.
Is way too many cases now of humanitarians dying. Many civilians, women, children, that the only thing they did was trying to get close by to somewhere that they were giving them flour or bread. This is not anymore about the 7 men and women of World Central Kitchen that perished on this unfortunate event. This is happening way for too long. It's been 6 months of targeting anything that seems moves. This doesn't seem a war against terror. This doesn't seem anymore a war about defending Israel. This really, at this point, seems it's a war against humanity itself.
And I thought that was so poignant that against humanity itself and just basic norms of human engagement at all, but treating people no longer like people, but just target sets array. But the one thing that he said there that almost stood out to me a little more was it seems to me that the Israeli rules of engagement is a different word for what he described, is target anything that moves.
Right. And that I think we were saying that as well, Danny, back in October, that when the Israeli army goes into Gaza, they will have a policy of kill anything that moves. And that was made clear very early on. And we are able to see some of it because of the video that have come out for the last 6 months, as well as the testimonies of aid workers, journalists, those who've gotten out of Gaza. We have a surgeon here from North Carolina who's in Gaza right now. He and a colleague, this is what they do. They are trauma surgeons, and they have between them a collective 60 years of working in conflict zones. And he authored a letter that was released, and his name is Dr. Perlmutter. And Perlmutter's letter, he talks about how they had never seen anything like this, but he also talked about exactly this: the kill anything that moves, including children. And so what he's seen in Gaza has been children coming into the hospitals, shot through the chest, through the head, deliberately targeted. And we've seen that certainly in videos, people carrying white flags being gunned down. The Israelis, if people remember, several months ago, even gunned down 3 of their own hostages who had escaped. They were carrying white flags as well, and they were gunned down. There was a video
screaming that they're Hebrews, don't shoot, and they chased them down.
Shot them. Yep.
I mean, the thing that stood out to me about that one was that it wasn't just one rogue soldier that mistaken whatever, but they shot 2 of them. One of the third ones escaped, and then a different set of soldiers got that guy, which made it absolutely certain that the rules of engagement were shoot anything that moves. If it's anything, it's just. And nothing has changed since.
And it won't change. And that will be the policy when they go into Rafah, because I think that they will go into Rafah unless, pressure is exerted on them that hasn't been exerted on them by the United States. I just don't see, or unless there's another circumstance on their northern border with Lebanon or something with Syria and Iran, I just don't see how they don't go into Rafah. They could surprise us all or not, but why would they go this far in their ethnic cleansing campaign? Why would they go this far in carrying out this operation and not finish it? It doesn't make sense.
And in fact, the White House is making some verbal claims that they are starting to now put some pressure on Israel, as John Kirby also said over the weekend.
Right.
A core message that the president delivered to Prime Minister Netanyahu in their phone call this past week, that if they've got to do more, they've got to make changes. Now, the Prime Minister assured the president that he would do that. We've seen some announcements in those early hours. That's welcome. We got to see more. We've got to see it over time.
Okay, fair enough as far as that. We got to see it over time. But then they asked President Biden himself, not his spokesman, he said this really kind of odd thing.
Did you threaten to stop military aid to Israel?
I asked them to do what they're doing.
I asked them to do what they're doing. I don't even know what that means, and I'm not being facetious. I don't know what that means.
And not being facetious either. I'm going to chalk that up to he's near the aircraft. He's near the helo there, and I'm 51 and I have hearing problems. He's 81 and he has hearing problems. So he has to have hearing problems. So I'm just going to chalk that up to him not fully hearing what was asked.
Very gracious of you.
The Israelis have claimed to open up 2 more border crossings, and today they did let in the most trucks they've let in 6 months, 355, I believe the number was. But that's well below the number that's needed to go in. And prior to October 7th, the number of trucks going in was 500 a day. And that was required because the Israelis, people need to remember, the Israelis since 2007 have maintained a total and complete blockade of Gaza. So they completely control everything that comes in and out of Gaza. What also people have to remember about that 500 truck number is that you'd actually would need more because of this genocide, because of this collective punishment over the last 6 months. Gazan agriculture has come to a complete stop. Their ability to produce their own food has come to a complete stop. Any warehouses and stores that they have been depleted, gone. Yeah. And so that 500 number of trucks that they need is probably much greater than that because of that, let alone the state of the people, right? They're in starvation. They're in phases of starvation. They're heading towards famine. This is the worst that the people who do this professionally, the professional aid workers who do this, the institutions that do this, they're all saying they've never seen anything like this. Again, the doctor here from North Carolina who's over there, he's been doing this for 30 years. He's been all through Africa, Ukraine, the Balkans, and Iraq, Afghanistan, and he's never seen anything like this. And that's what we keep hearing over and over again. And then when you start to look at the numbers, though, and this is where I think this tells a better story than Netanyahu's recitation of his numbers, of his battle damage estimates. When you start to look and see what's been destroyed in Gaza, all the universities, the hundreds and hundreds of schools, 80% of the homes, et cetera. But then you also look at in terms of humans, just with the aid workers, almost 200 aid workers have been killed in Gaza. So we know about the 7 who were killed with World Central Kitchen last week. But in addition, almost 200 other aid workers doing the same type of tasks have been killed by the Israelis deliberately. This is not accidental. This is nope, sorry. Oh, too bad. So sad. Wrong place, wrong time. This is deliberate.
And look, you add, depend on who you ask. I think there's different numbers. I've seen some over 100. I've seen at least one that said 94 members of the media have been killed. And the thing that's interesting to me is that the way the World Central Kitchen people were killed is the exact same way that some of these members of the media were killed. Meaning they were targeted. They were in marked vehicles. They had coordinated their actions with the IDF. And they were still killed. So that wasn't the first time that's happened. It's just that some of these other media outlets weren't the Western. So, we don't report on that kind of stuff. But that just shows you there's a very consistent pattern. And I wanted to
Danny, the Western media, the Western media, they get all their information. They get all the video, all the reporting being done by Palestinians who then get that, media out to the Western media. The Western media doesn't even tell us these people's names when they're alive. Right? I mean, so they've got these people for the last 6 months risking their lives to tell the story of what's happening there. The Western media has been using them for that purpose. Understandable. But they don't even tell us who these people are when they're alive, let alone when they're killed. So if you're only consuming Western media, if you're only watching ABC or CNN or Fox or New York Times or Washington Post or whatever, you would have no idea those numbers you just talked about there of 100 dead journalists. I mean, and it's deliberate, and people have to understand the ability of the Israelis to target these people. And I think if people have not read the reporting done by 972 magazine, which is an Israeli magazine, about the Israeli use of AI to target Palestinians, and their ability to target the Palestinians when they enter their homes. So I think this is something really, if we want to just go into a minute on this, because the Israelis have 3 AI programs that we know of that they use: Gospel, Lavender, and Where's Daddy. And that last one, that name is really significant. It's really quite ghoulish. But these programs, the Gospel and the Lavender programs, assemble target lists. So using AI, they're able to come up with a target list, a kill list of more than 30,000 Palestinians that they claim are connected to Hamas, which is massive. Our kill list, when I was in Afghanistan in 2009, our JPEL, our Joint Prioritized Effects list, the kill list that we had, that then we would send drones and airstrikes and our commandos against, was 3,000. And I thought that was massive. And this is 30,000 assembled through AI. And then, according to the Israelis themselves, vetted for less than half a minute by an actual human being before that target is then moved over to the Where's Daddy program. And the Where's Daddy program is the AI program that tracks these targets, these people. And the idea of it was to hit these people, to kill them when they are in their homes. So when the target returns home, that's when the Israelis launch an airstrike against that target. Coupled with that, they have a metric of how many civilians they are allowed to kill for each target based upon seniority. The most junior members on that list, so you're talking low-ranking Hamas, guys just carrying rifles. The Israeli rules were you can kill up to 15 civilians.
What?
For each of the
15.
That's how they are operating. And then for the senior commanders, you're talking battalion, brigade commanders, within their military wing, they were authorized to kill up to 300 civilians. So one of them, if you remember, you go back 5 months or so, 4 months, maybe 5 months ago, when the Israelis were striking the Jubaila refugee.
Yeah.
Remember that in North Gaza, and they were dropping 2,000-pound bombs in the midst of the most densely packed area in Gaza, and they killed hundreds of people. And then a couple weeks later, they said, "Well, we were targeting this commander." You could see how it actually played out.
Yeah.
I mean, they that was their justification, was that this commander, he's worth up to 300 civilians. And so the idea of them being able to track these people and then deliberately target them when they are at home, hence the name Where's Daddy, and kill their entire families with them, it just shows you what the reality of the Israeli policy is. Extends beyond kill anything that moves, which is what's happening on the street level, which is what's happening on the ground unit level, but on terms of the strategic level, the operational level, if you will. But that pushes down from the strategic, and it comes from the political level, right? This is what comes out of the policy of the Israeli government. This is political decisions to not just kill the Hamas leadership, but to kill everyone around them.
Yeah.
Really,
Matt, if I wish that we were only arguing at the national level, or maybe not only, but primarily on the morality of it, because one of the things we've always patted ourselves on the back since I've been alive is how good we are as a nation and how we're a force for good. We actually used to have that in some of our marketing symbols or programs for our Navy. I remember a force for good,
global force for good. Yeah, that was the
right.
The slogan.
And so when you see these kinds of things happening, we're literally turning a blind eye, as though blah blah blah, didn't hear anything, la 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 la, I'm not gonna, whatever. When you and I were on, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks back, when after the State of the Union speech, when Biden announced that he was going to send the U.S. Navy out to do this floating pier thing, whatever. We asked at the time, it's like, dude, it's just a political decision that they could open up the gates today. Right. We don't need to wait 2 months for this stuff to happen. Well, now then we see that play out physically after Biden apparently did actually privately threaten to cut off some of the weapon supply. Then suddenly the Erez Gate opens in the north. Ashdod Port opens up in there. And of course, no one asked what should be the obvious question. Hang on. If you just chose to open those passages, why do I need to bring in a floating pier when you have Ashdod right here and you could just unload the stuff this afternoon? Or the Jose Andres's folks who were pushing stuff off already on the beach, prior to this stuff going on. And as I understand, if you could touch on this, you're about to go and help somebody, or at least there's some kind of flotilla that's going to go off. What's the story with that? And how is this issue not what Netanyahu's claiming?
Yeah. So in terms of with what it is, I mean, just that latter point there, Danny, about it's not what they're claiming. It's true. They're able to just open it up now and admit more trucks. It's all their pretensions, all their excuses, all their protests about how we just can't do it fast enough. Now all of a sudden they can do it fast enough.
Yeah, just like that.
Exactly. And it's just a question of political will, of actually exerting some leverage, which is what the U.S. government has on Netanyahu. Now, Netanyahu, he has the Israeli lobby in the U.S. exerting leverage on the Biden administration. And so then it has to come down to a political decision for the Biden administration, the Biden reelection team. How do they want to handle this? Do they want to anger the Israeli lobby, or they want to continue to be complicit in this genocide? And they are trying, I think, to speak out of both sides of their mouth, walk a tightrope here. The reality is, though, is that they haven't done anything in actuality. And even though the Israelis have said that they've opened up those entrance points, that the port's open, we've seen 1 day of increased truck activity. That's it. And it's insufficient.
1 day.
Right. And to say, just as the Israelis have pulled out of southern Gaza, particularly out of Khan Yunis with their infantry division down there. At the same time, too, if you watch Al Jazeera this morning, they shelled the hell out of Khan Yunis again this morning.
Did
I
they?
mean, so I mean, it comes
missed
down
that.
to a thing of what are the actions, what are these people actually doing? And the other point you brought up is so I am next week. I'll head overseas and we'll work with the International Civilian Aid Flotilla to break the siege of Gaza. And this is an effort that many people are probably familiar with. This goes back to 2008, where and international flotillas on multiple occasions have tried to break the siege of Gaza, have tried to break the blockade, bring aid into Gaza, bring not just material, but also technical expertise, doctors, engineers, etc., to assist in Gaza. And later this month, there will be a flotilla that will leave that will attempt to block, to break that blockade and get more than 5,500 tons of aid onto the beaches of Gaza. It is an effort that is the people who are doing this understand the risks, they understand the severity, but they're compelled by witnessing this deliberate starvation, by witnessing this collective punishment.
Which is even more amazing when you consider what just happened to the World Central Kitchen people, the other couple hundred even that don't make much of the headlines, but I assure you in that community, they certainly are aware, and yet still without hesitation, they're continuing to go and to risk their lives. And we certainly tip our hats and wish that our country was doing the same kind of morality that these people are, but we'll have to, anyway, we can't do anything with that. We just have to bring more pressure. But
I mean, and I think the importance of the flotilla at this moment too, the urgency of it is increased further, right? With World Central Kitchen, with Arena, with the other aid organizations pulling out, with other aid organizations uncertain as to how they'll go forward, with UNRWA being disabled by Israel and the U.S. and Germany and UK and other nations being complicit in that as well. So the timing of this flotilla is very key. It's very important, and
it's life and death for a lot of the people on the beach.
Exactly. And so there will be hundreds of people taking part in this who are willing to risk their lives in order to try and do something to stop this genocide.
God bless them all. I want to shift gears a little bit to the next 6 months. All right. So we've talked about what's happened over the past 6 months and kind of where we are now, which is nowhere. It's just the presence of warfare. There doesn't appear to be any genuine, at least achievable strategy or any kind of objective that you can say, yes, this is reasonable, and therefore, maybe within this time frame the thing will be over. I don't see any of that. But let's take a look at what some do see. And as I mentioned earlier, Marwan was talking about that on Al Jazeera earlier. Here's how that went.
For Biden, this is the beginning of the end of this war. 6 months later, too long, it needs to wind down. It's the beginning of the end. For the Netanyahu, it's still the end of the beginning. This is the stage where the destruction has taken place, the annihilation of much of Gaza and a lot of its population and so on and so forth. But now there needs to be a pacification of Gaza, neutralization, and total destruction of Hamas's presence in the fabric of the Gaza society. Needs to be an occupation. And then there is the attack, which now Israel talks about, turning the defensive into an offensive in Lebanon.
So, he's saying that for Biden wants to get reelected in November. He wants the war to be done, to get it off the front page so that we can move on to something else that he likes. But for Netanyahu, it's just the end of the beginning, and he's got a lot more to go. We're going to get in that in just a second.
Right. And with Biden, every campaign stop he is at, he is being interrupted by protesters. And that has a real effect, because what happens when he goes and visits Tucson, when he came here to Raleigh, wherever he goes on his campaign and he's interrupted, well, the local media covers that. The national media may not be covering those protests, but the local media covers that the president, because it's a big deal. The president's interrupted, right? So they want that
who's voting. So it may not be the national, but the place where the people are voting.
Exactly. And the people who are not watching, people who are watching CNN and MSNBC, and that they already have their thoughts in their heads of where they're going in November, right? But the folks who are watching the local news, who aren't watching Dana Bash or I can't even remember the names of these anchors on these different channels.
Yeah.
Ali Velshi or whoever, I'm trying to remember a Fox one, but I can't remember any of the folks on Fox right now. But anyway, but the folks who are watching the local news, they're seeing this, right? And the White House wants to get to the point where, the smoke's not coming. They don't want to be in June and July, and the smoke is still coming up from the rubble in Rafah. Right. They want the president to be able to say, yes, we stopped them from doing that. We did this and we stopped them. And they killed way too many civilians, but it's over. And we're going to rebuild Gaza and ensure Israel security. And, he'll say the message will be there will be remorse in there, but there'll also be hope for the future. And, it'll become a tool they can use on the campaign. Somehow they will spin it. So that it was the White House's pressure that stopped.
That would be the case if that was the result.
Right.
But not only do you have Netanyahu basically not listening to anything, you have a couple of American folks, actually more than a couple, but I'm going to show you a couple that seem to be on Netanyahu's side.
I really think behind the motivation of the president and his team is they really want the fighting to stop. They're not saying that, but I think that's the implication of it. And that, if that happens, underscore what you just said, because if you leave multiple battalions effective in Gaza and most of the leaders effective in Gaza and the war terminates on those conditions, Hamas wins militarily in the long run. Why? Because they are effective enough to reattack at some point.
And we would be remiss if we didn't put David Petraeus out there, who apparently also is on the Netanyahu payroll.
You don't send the fire department to put out 70 or 80% of the blaze. You need to take it all out.
So do you think they should go into Rafah?
I do think they have to, but you have to do it the right way. They have to destroy Hamas, but how you do that, and this is what I believe the U.S. administration is voicing concerns about, to show us the plan for how you're going to move 1.1 million displaced people to another area in Gaza, because they're obviously not going to leave Gaza, and then to isolate that battlefield. But I do think they have to go in there, but they've got to get them out, and they've got to get obviously a huge amount of humanitarian assistance in there to take care of these people who are, in some cases, on the verge of starvation.
Now, the reason why I said, they seem to be on Netanyahu's side, because they used the same kind of language that Netanyahu did at the beginning of this clip, where it told him that to have a ceasefire is surrender, that Israel is going to surrender to Hamas, that they're trying to win the war. Like any kind of ceasefire, no one even talks about that. The purpose of a ceasefire is to stop the killing of the innocent people, is to require Israel to do the same thing that we require our troops to do, like what you've described in previous times when we discussed this kind of thing. And instead, they want literally for Netanyahu to have a free hand and to not have any restrictions on him, with the full support of all of our stuff. How do you get this extreme contradiction between American interests and Israeli interests?
I'm just watching. I'm still stuck on General Keane and General Petraeus and trying in my head to figure out, are they really that dumb, or are they in on it? Right. In the sense of they really believe what they're saying, or are they going along with it because it's in their own personal as well as their institutional interests to be in a line with Israel? And so when you look at this greater question of interests, what are the American interests here? In the sense of, you divorce from the political party's sake, right? Where the political parties are scared to death of not having that Israeli lobby support. When you take that away, you really begin to start to get to this idea of, okay, what is the interest at stake here? What should be the American interests in the region? And I think most people would say the interest in the United States and the Middle East should be stability. And this is policies, not just of the last 6 months, but the last decades, that have done the exact opposite. So Israeli policies toward the Palestinians, particularly after 67 with the occupation of Palestine, have led to great instability throughout the region. One, it has been just, on another level, it has been a complete repudiation of international law, complete repudiation of moral and natural law for the United States to go along with and support and give cover for decades to the occupation of Palestine by Israel. So you have that you have that effect on the United States, like that just abrogation of its duties. Of you spoke earlier, Danny, about how the United States claimed it was a global force for good, and so just on that alone, it completely upends the United States narrative campaign, completely belies it. People hear that and they scoff at it, and that is something that has a real effect on how the U.S. can operate around the world when the majority of the people of the world don't believe and don't trust the United States. But then on the issue of instability, the circumstances of the occupation cause instability, of course, within the occupied areas themselves. They cause instability, insecurity within Israel itself, and that ripples out throughout the region, so that you have a region that continually can align itself, can utilize what the Israelis are doing in Palestine for their own purposes. So you can have nations that have brutal authoritarian governments like Syria or Iran, Egypt, whoever, Saudi Arabia. They can utilize what's occurring in Palestine to justify their own actions. Right. So, I mean, you can
and we have nothing to say. We have no voice. We can't call anyone out on it because they'll just mock us.
That's exactly right. So right. I mean, so the only thing the United States has in all this is, of course, the power of the purse. So we're able to keep the Egyptians in line because we give them we give their military more than $1 billion a year. Right. Of course, excuse me, where it goes, though, from there is that you've created this Frankenstein's monster with Israel, and it is now acting as such, right? So you've allowed it to act in a certain manner for decades. You've given it everything it needs to continue its policies, particularly in respect to the occupation. But now you've seen the fruits of that support, right?
Rotten fruit,
right?
yeah.
I mean, this is what you've given birth to. And, that's why I think a lot of people, commentators, when they talk about these last 6 months, they say this was inevitable, whether it was going to happen in 2023 or whether it was going to happen in 2026, or, luckily for some reason it didn't happen, but it could have happened in 2021. This was inevitable. This was the Frankenstein's monster that we created. And at some point it was going to carry out what it's
right. And so here's the issue. So with all of that wreckage in the screen here and the understanding of where we are, let's take a look real quick at where we're going. And in the time remaining here, I just want to look at one aspect from two separate angles. The first one is where is this going? Because there has to be some kind of war termination strategy, any kind, even if it's a bad one. They got to have something. I don't think Netanyahu just wants to fight for the sake of fighting and just wants that to now be a permanent condition. I don't think even that helps him. But the question is, what is it? Because I think the two-state solution is off the table from if it was ever on the table. It never was on the table. But even publicly, two states off the table. Well, apparently even a one-state solution is not on the table. One state meaning everyone lived together. Yeah. So there's no one state solution either. It appears that the only default remaining objective is a return to the status quo ante, where Israel wants to keep all the Palestinians in a box on the Gaza Strip permanently into open air prison. They want to return to that. And that's what it seems that they want to have as a stable situation, either that or the expulsion of Allah. I think that would probably be their primary, but it seems to be that only one of those two is the Israeli objective. Can any American administration support that from this point forward?
I think they would tacitly support it in this and quietly.
I'm sorry. I don't mean like do they want to? I mean, can they now?
Yeah, you know how I think they do it, Danny. I think so Egypt and Jordan to carry out the remainder of this plan, and this is not, of course, what Danny or I think or want to have occur. But this is, I think, what we're trying to get at here is what's the next steps for the Israelis? What are the, in our crystal ball, what do we think the Israelis are going to do next? And, if the continuation of that ethnic cleansing campaign that they launched on October 7th, following the Hamas attacks that day, that was the opportunity then for them to launch that attack. Egypt and Jordan have stood firm. They're not going to allow anyone in. I think the idea is, as you said, you're not going to have a two-state solution. You're also not going to have a one-state solution. You're going to go back to the status quo. And if the conditions in Gaza are going to be so obscene, so severe, that voluntary immigration, if you want to call it voluntary immigration, put that in quotes and italicize it, and but the idea of voluntary immigration is going to be the tools that the Israelis use to get Palestinians out, to continue on with the ethnic cleansing campaign. So make it so that people are starving, but they're not dying in large enough numbers to really capture the world's attention. Put the blame on the Palestinians, of course, for not being able to rebuild and take care of their people, just like we did. Oh, look at these Iraqis, look at these Vietnamese, look at these Afghans, how come they can't carry their weight? So use that strategy. And I think what you're probably seeing and have been seeing at Israeli embassies around the world is Israeli diplomats trying to find nations that will take Palestinians. So, hey, Ecuador, will you take 100,000 Palestinians? And where the United States then rolls in on this part is the United States provides support to those countries. So Ecuador, if you take 100,000 Palestinians, the United States will give you $100 million, right? And I think that is how they carry out the next phases of this ethnic cleansing campaign. Because otherwise, they're stuck, as you were saying, Danny, with the same problem. You've got this situation where now you've completely immiserated the Palestinians. You've begun this genocidal campaign. You've carried it out to a great degree. You've got all these problems with the international community. You're still you're pretty certain, though, if you're Israel, that the United States is going to continue to support you. The Biden administration may do things to kind of show that it's not, but overall, the guts of that support is going to remain there. But then how do you realize the goal you are trying to achieve? How do you get the Palestinians out? And I think this may be the plan, is to try and make it so awful there that anybody, regardless of how steadfast you are in your resistance to the Israeli occupation, how much you want to not dishonor the generations of Palestinians who stood up to the Israelis before you, as much as you don't want to leave because of what happened to your family done by the Israelis. You still have living family members. You still have children in your family, and now's a chance to get out. Right.
Now,
so I can get my family to Ecuador, and at least we don't have to worry about 2023, 2024 happening to us again in Ecuador.
Well, of course, that assumes that any of these countries are going to want to take numbers of large. But in the last few minutes we have here, talk about the other half of this equation, because we've talked about the Israeli government, what they want, the U.S. government, some of these other governments around the world. But let's look back at the Palestinian people. Now, as you've talked about many times, is the level of angst and anger and desperation prior to October 7th was through the roof, which was part of the reason why there was such an explosion. What is it going to be like now if these so-called 4 battalions that Netanyahu keeps talking about, he declares that they're destroyed at some point, and then says the combat phase is now over, or some aircraft carrier moment like I referred to, and which is almost certain to come at some point, unless, of course, this expands out to Iran. And we'll talk about that another day, because that's obviously looming like a sword of Damocles over, depending on what they're going to do. But just for the Palestinian people, if this thing comes to some declared end, but there is no hope for them, no one state, no two state, no self-governance, living in tents for some unknown number of years, what happens to the people, and what do do you think?
Well, I think that's where you get to this, where the Israelis think that, again, quote, voluntary, unquote, immigration will be possible. It's so awful that what else can they do? And you've destroyed everything. You've destroyed the agricultural land. You've destroyed the greenhouses, right? You've destroyed their livestock. There's no way they can feed themselves. Now they're completely dependent upon aid, as they were before, but at least they had their own sources to a degree. You destroyed all their buildings, all their institutions. There's no water and sewage network. You pumped seawater into the tunnels, in an attempt to not just kill Hamas fighters, but to poison the groundwater. Right, so that the groundwater is no longer drinkable because it's all infused with salt water, which also destroys the agricultural land as well. Right, you've destroyed. Just think of an institution. Think of a cultural institution, an educational institution, a religious institution. All of those things you've destroyed. All of it, rendered a society unable to function in any way that is recognizable to anyone who's lived in the last 300 or 400 years. So you've created conditions for the Palestinians where I think many people look at it and say, well, what would I do? And if I had a family, I'd try and get out. But then there's also the other side of that, though, with the Palestinians is many of them won't. Because they can't afford to, but also many of them will say, no, I mean, this is what my family died for, and I'm not surrendering. Leaving will be surrender. And so this is where I think that Israeli plan runs into the wall of what Palestinians call samud, steadfastness, right? And so this plan of getting them to migrate, I don't think is really going to work, because even as awful as it is, as terrible as the conditions are, and as we can sit here and emphasize and say, what will we do? There's also, too, that spirit of resistance that has been within the Palestinians for generations and generations. And so they would see leaving as a betrayal. And then, of course, there's the aspects of we have to continue the resistance. We have to avenge what was done to us, right? Yeah. So you could shoot dead. You could capture however many tens of thousands of Hamas fighters are left. Wave a magic wand. You've got them all over there. You shoot them all dead. Doesn't matter. You're still going to have people within Palestine, within Gaza, who are going to pick up the rifles from those men that you shot and carrying resistance. I mean, we've seen that. I mean, that is just the way human history works. That's the human experience. That's how we are as people. Again, ask yourself, what would you do if they murdered your brother and his family? What would you do? Right? If they killed your children, they killed your parents, they killed your brothers and sisters, what would you do? And most of us would resist. And many of us would resist.
And if you don't have to look very much farther to see how that physically plays out, then Iraq, you had Al-Qaeda, right. Then Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then ISIS, and then now ISIS-K. It just keeps changing, even though you keep. How many people have we killed instead that they were Taliban or ISIS or whatever? Who knows? I mean, the number's in the tens of thousands. It's got to be.
There was a joke, Danny. There's a joke, Danny, for a long time about what's the most dangerous position. The dangerous position to be in Al-Qaeda. And the joke was that was be the number 3 guy of Al-Qaeda, because we just killed every few weeks, particularly if you remember around 2008, 2009, 2010, 11, when we were particularly ramping up our drone program. It seemed like every few weeks or so, every couple of months, we killed the number 3 guy in Al-Qaeda, right? And what would they do? They would just get another number 3 guy. I mean, that's how it works.
Never a shortage.
Yeah. I mean, so the whole idea that somehow you're going to, it's no different than, if people want to understand this, watch the television series, the great HBO series from 20 years ago. Watch the Baltimore crime series, The Wire. And you see this whole folly with the way the police work, where we're going to crack down on the gangs and we're going to put these guys in jail and we're going to kill a couple of them and it's all going to go away. And no, other people just rise up and take their place. Because why? Because of the conditions of the society, because of the conditions of those neighborhoods, because of the oppression that those people were living under, right? I mean, that gives the environment, that creates the conditions for a gang. Right. And in this case, that example is like on steroids, or the reality is like on steroids compared to the example, because, you have created the conditions for an insurgency, and you started creating those conditions decades ago. And now you've just given it, a shot to, boost it. But certainly you have no better, ecosystem for a violent resistance to occupation than what we've seen in Palestine for the last decades. And so why that would change following this, particularly after the great abuse and the brutality and the punishment you put on those people, they are not going to give up. They are going to continue to fight back. And what we'll probably see is probably something more extreme than we've already seen.
Yeah, I'm afraid that that's going to be the case. I mean, it's human nature, and we just don't ever seem to learn from it. Maybe we're just trying to keep the lid on without any thought to how to actually solve this, because there are ways to mitigate things, but we'll talk about that on another day.
And I would say that you could, but the possibility of that not occurring is also there, Danny, right? If you were to, at this point, because this is how Hamas and the Gazan people are framing the Israeli withdrawal from Khan Yunis, is that this is a tactical victory for us. We beat them and now they're returning. You let them have those talking points. You let them have that narrative. Okay. And then that opens up the possibility, and you let the Israelis have the narrative that we went in there and after October 7th, we punished them for what they did. You allow both sides to have their narrative. That gives them the ability to turn around to their people and say, okay, now we negotiate. And so you could have the potential here for the potential for what we described and talk about doesn't have to be. There is the opportunity.
If I had the power, and I wish I did, because if I did, I would for sure do this, and make you the Secretary of State with all the associated powers that go along with that. There's no question that this could have been over months ago, or at least brought into a stability situation. But the problem is, there isn't the political will to get there. There are solutions.
This goes back to Sun Tzu, the famous Chinese, philosopher, war expert. I'm sure a lot of people have read The Art of War, right? He talked about this. You got to give your enemy a golden bridge. It's not being weak. It's not wise. It's wise. It's wise. You got to give them a way out. Give them an opportunity. And so that's what both sides have to do here. Hamas has to give Israel an opportunity to say, okay, we won, right? Give Netanyahu something to hold on politically with, right? Gets back to our original conversation. You got to give him something to ensure his political survival. At the same time, too, you've got to give Hamas something to say to their folks, look, we won. This was a great victory. Our people suffered. This is a historical victory for us. Just like, supposedly when you fly into Algeria, you're greeted by this sign about the liberation of Algeria in the 50s and 60s by the Algerian resistance. And it speaks to the sacrifice, the martyring of 1 million people, right? And this is something that I know of this because this is what the Hamas people talk about. That example, that you have to sacrifice your people. People have to be willing to be martyrs in order to achieve something. Here you have that moment then. Okay, you've got that moment. You had your martyrdom. Now move forward. Utilize that as a political victory to then move on to the next phase. The problem being, though, Danny, is that the people who are in charge of both the Israeli government and Hamas, is it in their political interests to have that peace, that security and stability? And I guess if we went back and listened to what you and I were just talking about 40 minutes ago, it wouldn't be.
Well, yeah. And like one of our viewers there just said, we need to make you not Secretary of State, but the president. So, okay, I stand corrected. I'm willing to correct my error and put you in the position that actually matters the most.
Well, thank you.
Listen, Matt, I'll tell you, I mean, we're obviously going to continue watching on this. And one of the anguishing parts is that apparently Netanyahu doesn't want to be Sun Tzu, doesn't want to read that because he wants to give zero for everything and take all for his action. And it's just, I don't think it's going to work that way. And of course, the big, Damocles sword hanging over all this right now, on top of everything that we just talked about for the last hour, is the probability that because of Israel's attack into, crossing a red line that no one else has crossed other than Al Qaeda, and attacked an embassy in Syria, Iran is going to do something probably within 24, 48 hours, potentially even from now. And then what is Israel going to do in response? And that could completely upend everything that's going on right now in a bad direction. But we'll bring you back on to talk about that once that actually happens.
Right. I mean, yeah, exactly, Danny. Something could happen that we just say, you know what, delete this episode. It sounded good at the time, but
it really did, man.
It really did, but now, what's the phrase? OBE, overcome by events.
OBE, man.
Yeah.
Right. I fear that hopefully before the end of this night's over, we don't get there. But thank you so much for coming on, Matt. It's always an absolute pleasure and delight to have you talking about ground truth reality and even illuminating what's actually possible, what we could do if only there were the political will to get it done. The suffering could be over and at least some kind of stability could return. But we'll leave it with there for now. We're going to be back on with Jason Beardsley at 1 o'clock today, talking about, this whole withdrawal from Khan Yunis. What does it actually mean, but still no ceasefire, which apparently the U.S. has demanded? We'll have Jason Beardsley. You're not going to want to miss that. And then later on this afternoon, Colonel Douglas McGregor, some blunt truth on Ukraine. You're definitely not going to want to miss that one. He's always got some great nuggets to say, and we'll bring you all of that this afternoon. So be sure to like and subscribe. Share this with your friends. Don't let them miss this. You make sure you guys come back too, because we are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you all the truth that you need. Thanks, and we'll see you later on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.